Well, welcome back to The Responsible Edge, the podcast exploring what it really takes to lead responsibly in today's business world. I'm Charlie Martin, your host, founder of TrueMark and the Anti-Greenwash Charter. Our article this week is Oliver Balch's Wave of Regulation Drives Demand for Sustainability Advice in the Financial Times. It reveals how a surge in ESG regulation has boosted consulting spend, but also raises questions about whether compliance work is distracting from real transformation. And I'm absolutely thrilled to say, as a number two go, that I'm joined today by Carrie Bihar, Head of Sustainability at the Useful Simple Trust. Carrie, it's absolutely brilliant to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time.
It's great to be here, Charlie. Thanks for having me.
Now, Carrie, I've alluded to there that this is our second go at having you on. I have to fess up that due to horrible technical issues when we previously recorded, we weren't able to salvage our conversation before. So I have to say a big thank you for sticking with it and coming back on today.
No problem at all.
Right. So let's move. I very briefly, Carrie, introduced your head of sustainability role, which I think we're fairly familiar with here on Responsible Edge, but keen to hear more about the specifics of what you do, as well as perhaps just introducing Useful Simple Trust and what you guys do at the organization.
Sure. So the Useful Simple Trust is a group of purpose-led businesses that are committed to improving the built environment for the benefit of both people and planet. Our team of about 90 people or so includes architects, engineers, designers, strategists, and we work across all scales of projects and across many different sectors, but always with a focus on being positively transformative within the built environment.
Carrie, that's an amazing sort of overview, if you like. And I should say for any of our listeners and viewers that want to check out Useful Simple Trust, we'll obviously link to website, etc., and to Carrie's LinkedIn profile so you guys can go and dig a little deeper. How did it come into, it sounds like a fairly unique organization in the sense of that collective that you've described there. Can you give us a little bit more on the kind of origins story, Carrie, and when did you join the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So the organization has been around in various parts for about 25 years now. Started out as two separate businesses, Expedition Engineering and Thomas Matthews Communication Designers, who a period in time before I joined came together and realized that they had a shared ethos, a shared mission, and that actually the sort of crossover of those skills of bringing design and strategic thinking, integrating that with engineering and more sort of heavy engineering thinking was a really powerful skill set for driving transformative innovation in our sector. I joined the organization 10 years ago now. I just actually received a little a gift from my employer of some trees being planted in my name in Scotland, which I was really chuffed about. So that's why I know it's been sort of 10 years and about 2 weeks now. And in that time, my role has kind of varied. I joined as a quite junior sustainability consultant, spent a few years in our corporate and organizational sustainability consulting team. And then about 5 years ago, I took on a new role was formed as the head of sustainability, which I took on. And so now I split my time between leading our organizational sustainability and impact programs, which includes our B Corp certification, carbon literacy initiatives, our carbon transition action plan, various other work streams related to that. And then in the rest of the time, I work in our master planning team, where we develop technical strategies that support the delivery of sustainable places, communities and estates over the long term. And there our focus is on embedding regenerative design principles, and our work is inspired by sort of Kate Raworth's Denner economics and emerging regenerative design paradigm. So there I work sort of more technically on developing and implementing sustainability strategies for master plans.
Fascinating. So you really do get that sense of both sort of the in-house sustainability initiatives and working on the development of your organization from a sustainability perspective, and equally get to, apply your skills to working with clients. How do you find that as a sort of one hat to the other. Is it very transferable in your context, or are there real noticeable differences in terms of the work that you do on either side?
Well, I think it is really transferable. And it also is particularly kind of relevant in the context of the conversation that we're about to have today. And that there's kind of, I'm really aware of both what we are telling or advising our clients to do, and also what we are doing ourselves. And I think that's it kind of keeps us on our toes. I feel like we can't ask someone to do something and not be doing it ourselves. But actually trying to implement some of these things in our own organization and encountering the kind of hurdles and barriers and challenges around that makes me, I think it makes me much a more sort of sympathetic and a pragmatic consultant, because I understand it's not straightforward.
It's fascinating, that degree of empathy and understanding, as you say, that you can have as a result of working on both sides is a really interesting observation, I suppose. Carrie, I'm going to ask you now to go back to and give us a little bit more kind of origin story. You mentioned that you've been with the Useful Simple Trust for 10 years now. And by the way, congratulations. Great to hear that we've had trees planted in your name as well. But give us, and you mentioned that you joined as a more junior kind of sustainability consultant when you joined the company. But I want to understand a little bit more about what's inspired you to ultimately, follow the career that you have. Can you take us back and name or recall like a particular experience that kind of most shaped your sense of kind of ethics and responsibility at work? Can you just give us a little bit of a flavor as to what that experience might have been?
Okay, well, I think my personal sustainability journey really accelerated after I graduated from a master's program in environmental design and engineering, which I completed, about 15 years ago now. And one of the first assignment that we were asked to do in the first week of that course, it still sort of stands out for me. So I'll describe that. And it was really interesting. We were asked to, so I came from a background in architecture. I trained to be an architect, studied architectural design. And then instead of going into the workplace in 2009, when there was just no work, I decided to do this master's program in environmental design and engineering. And the first thing that we were asked to do was calculate our personal carbon footprint. And I'd never done this before. I'd barely used an Excel form. I had really been focused on design work. So it felt very, very technical, very challenging, but it was so interesting. And then we had to write an accompanying short paper describing our experience. And I just spent the best part of a year traveling around the world. So I had these horrendous carbon emissions associated with all those long haul flights, which I'm now sort of, slightly embarrassed about, really. But it was so interesting when plotted this bar chart, and basically wouldn't fit on the page, the flight emissions, because they were kind of off the top, and then everything else was so negligible. So that was kind of a bit of an eye-opener moment for me about the impact that we have and the sort of need to change.
And Carrie, let me just ask you on that. Did that, when you mentioned that was the first week of your course? So how did that, I know it's difficult to say because obviously that then framed the rest of your course, but from that point onwards, like how did that change the way that you focused or the way that you approached your learning and then ultimately the beginning of your career?
Well, I think it made me realize how just really, really important, because that was done in parallel to learning about climate change and the sort of harmful effects that was happening. But also this, I think it was what made me realize was that all of us are playing a part, however small. And sometimes there's an argument that as an individual actions don't count, or that even small business actions don't count. But actually it was I think it was a brilliant first exercise that it really brought it back to the individuals and gave us a sense of some sort of agency over the subject.
And ultimately, I love from the way you've described that, the collective responsibility, the fact that, as you say, we each have an influence and we can, and when that influence is laid bare and we are unable to hide away from it, it can have a really transformational effect on our own personal behavior. But equally, from what you've then gone on to do with your career, what you choose to focus your energy, your time and your expertise on, which has obviously been fantastic. Carrie, I know that was a whistle-stop tour, but I'm going to suggest that any of our listeners and viewers that want to check out a bit more of your background, obviously, as I mentioned, we'll link to your LinkedIn profile so they can go and do a bit of a dig around. But for now, can we move forward? You've already sort of slightly titillated the article that we're going to be discussing this week. Would you mind just providing us with a bit of a summary, an overview of what's in the piece?
Of course. So the title of the article is Wave of Regulation Drives Demand for Sustainability Advice. It's a Financial Times article from February this year, 2025. And the article shares some, it opens by showing some quite positive statistics around the growth of the sustainability consulting industry. And it attributes this rise in part to new enhanced ESG regulations, particularly across Europe. The article, I think, really effectively highlights the tension between the value and insight that businesses can gain by focusing more on ESG data versus that burden of regulatory compliance for businesses that are often already competing in quite a tough global market in parts of the world where perhaps don't have this kind of policy and regulation. The other angle that I wanted to highlight was about how, due to this change in policy, sustainability professionals are now spending more time on compliance rather than on developing and implementing strategy, which arguably is the more impactful and important area of focus.
Carrie, that was brilliantly summarized. I was going to say, for any of our listeners and viewers that want to check out the source article, we'll link to that. But Carrie's picked out, I think, those two kind of most critical parts, if you like, that the article covers. Carrie, I want to ask you something specific, though. Is there anything in this article that you think people are most likely to overlook, having read through it, that you think you'd like to highlight? Or do you think it's all fairly clear and self-explanatory?
Well, I think something that's interesting about the article is that it was written at the start of this year, in a time of sort of global and geopolitical upheaval. Since then, we've seen the rowing back of ESG commitments among some organisations, and particularly in certain parts of the world. So I suppose it's kind of interesting to reflect whether that is still the case, 6 months, 8 months later.
And out of interest, thinking about UST and your work, have you seen an impact of that? Has that had any influence, the sort of rowing back, or have you not, as sort of clients, etc., and the organisation sort of stayed as committed as before?
I think we've certainly tried to stay as committed. It's an integral part of our mission to be a responsible business, so we are still going strong with that, and we believe that our clients value it and respect it. In terms of, I don't think we've seen, clients haven't turned around to us and said, oh no, actually we don't want to do that anymore. So it's not that level. I suppose it has been a difficult time in the industry for many professionals, I think, with just perhaps a slowing down of work and a sort of stretching down. So I don't know how closely you can connect that to geopolitical matters. We've also seen sort of the reduction of team. Our sustainability team has stayed about the same number of people, possibly even grown, but I am aware that others in the industry have contracted. So I was reassured, but wasn't certain when I saw this 6% growth figure in the article about whether that's still the case.
Yeah, and crucially, the 6% growth figure in terms of expenditure on consultancy-related services in ESG, which I think there is so much complexity here, isn't there, Carrie? Because one of the things that struck me about the article is that I think the article alludes to the fact that sustainability, one of the trends is that's becoming a bigger issue across many organizations and larger organizations that's sort of filtering into the compliance and the audit and the legal side of organizations, which actually means that the sustainability functions within these entities are now liberated to a certain degree to focus on perhaps more of the strategic, more of the implementation work itself, which might then actually mean that a reduction in the amount of people working within the sustainability department doesn't necessarily reflect a reduction in focus or impact. So it's so nuanced, isn't it? You really got to take it on a case-by-case basis. Was there, when you think about like that overall balance that you've described at the beginning between like regulation, and I'm going to really simplify things, but like focus on regulation and reporting versus innovation and implementation, like do you think we've overbalanced one way or the other, or do you think we've got it pretty much right for where we are right now?
It's hard to say. I think if I could sit on the fence, sorry. I think
very diplomatic of you.
I think from a sort of what resonated with me from a small business perspective, where I lead a really lean, small sustainability function in the business. I think we could easily spend all of our time just writing policies, measuring the emissions, preparing plans. That would, already sort of fill up our time. So I do feel that. I do feel that burden sometimes, and I want to spend the time on the implementation, on the driving through change, and on those kind of initiatives. But at the same time, I see that and our all of our sustainability commitments and programs are voluntary. We're not a large enough business to fall under any of the kind of requirements, or very few of them at least. So it is voluntary. And on the other side, I do see the value of a strategy and the value of a policy, because actually that's the hook from which everything can hang. So whilst sometimes it maybe feels sort of bureaucratic and burdensome to be doing that work, I do feel that putting together the structure and almost the governance then allows action to happen on the ground. And I see it slightly the other way from what you presented, because I think, well, not what you presented, but the article alluded to the fact that the sustainability function gets taken into the other parts of the business as sustainability could do strategy. But I feel like it's almost the other way, in that we, if we deal with that policy, the governance, the structure and that aspects, then we can leave the rest of the business to be doing the action and innovating, and sort of driving the change bottom up, which I think can be perhaps quite empowering and effective.
That's really interesting. So what you're saying is that by you taking on the heavy lifting, if you like, in terms of the reporting, in terms of the measurement side of things, the stuff that alluded to in the article could be a distraction in other cases to doing the strategic implementation work. What you're saying is by taking that on, you kind of liberate the rest of your organization to really think about innovation and strategic kind of implementation of whatever policy or whatever strategy you put together. Is that,
exactly.
that? Is that a fair observation?
No, that's exactly what I was trying to say. And it's about, creating the conditions within which the innovation and the great work can happen. And that's what I see as a big part of my role.
And does that have interest? Just asking you like a personal question, like as a head of sustainability, how does that affect what does success look like to you when it comes to like reviewing the impact of your, as you say, your voluntary initiatives? Are you, from what you've just described there, again, I'm putting words in your mouth here, but like, the degree to which the rest of the organization is truly engaged in implementation of these initiatives would be a key KPI if I was going to be thinking about the way that you operate and the fact that you want to inspire others to do the implementation work. Is that a key part of your, focus?
Yeah, I think it is. Absolutely. And I haven't ever articulated it that explicitly before, but this week, I've been reviewing proposals for investment for an R&D and pro bono investment fund that we have in the business, where any individuals are allowed to make an application and receive a small amount of funding that they can then use work time to move forward and trailblazing R&D initiative or do some sort of really valuable pro bono work. And within that work stream and in doing those reviews, the thing that I found really interesting was kind of the number of people who have engaged from the business within it. And I found myself looking back over last year's applications, because this is the second year that we've run the program, and counting the number of people that applied and the number of people that applied this year, and looking at the kind of growth in that and how it's spread between the business. Because in a way, I think from my perspective, I'd rather everyone was doing a little bit than there were just 2 or 3 people really like with a big sustainability hat on driving it forward. It is about kind of collective action and sort of ripple waves of impact, and how we can spread that as far as we can.
And I'm now going to ask you the $64 trillion question here, Carrie, but what is it that's happened this year compared to last year that you think has led to that increased engagement with that brilliant initiative, by the way. I think anybody listening in that it picks up on that R&D fund will be inspired by that. But yes, what do you put it down to? Why has that happened?
Well, I think there's a few things. One really prosaic thing is probably some people have heard about it last year, seen colleagues working on fun, engaging stuff, and thought, I want a bit of that. So I think there's that. But also we've been really doing a drive this year on measuring and articulating the impact of our work. And I've been leading that piece of work. And we've developed a tool which we call our handprint tool, which is specifically around measuring the impact of our work against the regenerative design spectrum. So we use the term handprint as the kind of flip side of footprint, which is, everyone knows, is just scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. But actually, as a small business and a service-based business, most of our impact is actually through the projects that we work on, which don't get measured in our scope 1 to 3 emissions. So our handprint is the impact that we're having in the wider industry and on society through the projects that we're part of. And we've developed a tool for measuring that impact. We've been rolling it out and trying to engage as much as we can of different parts of the business so that everyone develops a kind of literacy and ability to articulate the impact of what we do, whether it's design or engineering or consulting.
I love it. I mean, what a brilliant initiative, the handprint initiative. I think anyone listening in that's in the consultancy space, whatever that looks like, the service-based space, will look at that as something to consider adopting themselves. I think that's a brilliant way of viewing things. Out of interest, the article, sort of bringing it back to that slightly, the article kind of alludes to the fact that yes, there's so much more money going into ESG consultancy essentially, and there are some really strong service-based businesses that are positioned to do very well out of this. Obviously, one of the things that could be thrown at the consultancy sector is perhaps the slight hypocrisy around, advising clients to operate in a particular way and then not perhaps doing it themselves. Is by adopting the handprint analysis that you've just described, is that something to factor into your own analysis of the UST's kind of impact as an organization and then what you're doing with the rest of your clients? Is that how you create your kind of net score, if you like? I've massively butchered that, but do you understand what I'm asking?
I do understand what you're saying. And yeah, absolutely. The handprint initiative came out of many conversations we've had where we felt at the sort of a leadership level that actually our carbon footprint doesn't really justify what it is that we do. It feels very irrelevant in the context of the kind of work that we do. So whilst it's important for us to measure and report our emissions, and we're part of the STBI and various other kind of SME climate disclosure and reporting initiatives, really the sort of benefit and the major impact of our work is through our projects. And that is the conversations that led to us saying, well, we need to find a way to measure and report that impact, because it's not enough to keep saying, okay, well, our carbon footprint doesn't matter because we're a small business. It's all about our projects. Fine, give us evidence of how your projects are so great. And that was really eye-opening, because by looking at the regenerative spectrum, it's not just the regenerative spectrum has a degenerative end and a regenerative end. And we're trying to be brutally honest about how our projects impact on both ends of that scale. Because whilst we always try to be moving things in a more regenerative direction, we all know that the construction industry is responsible for a significant proportion of global carbon emissions and is by no means perfect or regenerative as a whole.
It's fascinating that, I can acknowledge that. I think the figure's always thrown about as 40% of global emissions, isn't it, comes from the construction or built environment sector, which is absolutely mind-blowing when you reflect on it. But I just love this handprint concept. And out of interest, this was something that you guys at UST have come up with sort of independently. It's not something that's been inspired by anybody else doing anything like this within the sector.
No, I don't think we could claim to have invented the handprint. There are a few. It's existed before in a few other. If you Google it, there's a few other instances of the term being coined, but it certainly hasn't reached mainstream adoption yet. We'd love others to start using that terminology as well, because we think it really sums up quite nicely what it is that we do.
Well, I just think that like so much and again, this is sort of slightly away from the topic of the article, but I think being inspired by this, it's, we talk so much about how do you engage? You've got a 90-person organization. Like, how do you get everybody on side? How do you get people invested and interested? And we're obviously going through, a slight ESG backlash, crisis of engagement and interest, essentially, in this area. Well, it's a brilliant way of making it meaningful, like really meaningful to everyone within the organization, and presumably to the board and to investors, etc., as well, who suddenly you're starting to talk the kind of language and the kind of impact that actually really means so much more to your key stakeholders. That it just seems like a brilliant thing to have done, and perhaps why you're seeing so much more of this engagement in the R&D fund that you've put together.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's been really well received by our board and our board of trustees, our executive board and our board of trustees. I think everyone just loves something that you can put some numbers to, which is a whole separate conversation about the value of qualitative versus quantitative data. But in this instance, I'll take it. You show a graph and people immediately start to get interested. And then that opens the door to have a conversation about some of that nuance, because really the numbers it generates aren't the value. It's the conversation around where our work does make a positive impact, where our work is still contributing to environmental and social harm, and how we can move as much as possible and accelerate that transition towards a more regenerative future.
Hear, Carrie. You're going to get your first hear of the show. I thought I was brilliantly explained. I also think there's a theme here that does relate back to the article's themes, which is really interesting. And it's all about, as we've kind of touched upon, you mentioned it's not numbers for the sake of numbers, but we are going through, I feel like from a reporting perspective, yes, we might have over-egged it in terms of the requirements, especially for the smaller organizations. And perhaps that's why we saw the CSRD rolled back in the way that we did. But ultimately, we're in this moment of, collectively within the sustainability space, we need to know what we're dealing with. We need to benchmark. We need to understand setting of, really accurate goals and objectives and KPIs, etc., in order to liberate us to then work on the innovations that are informed by really clear data insight. And that is what we're now going to be heading into, hopefully, is this new dawn of AI-assisted ESG data, which will be cleaner, it'll be more accurate, it'll be more easy to ultimately, pull together, and we can then look at the strategic side of things. You're smiling. Is there anything in what I've just said that you think perhaps is sort of ill-fated or not particularly well considered?
No, I hope you make it sound very simple, and I'm really excited about this new future where all the data just comes to me in a format that is I can just glean the insight from and disseminate it. I think AI and data has enormous potential, but I think we're still a fair way from just having access to the data that we really need to be able to communicate the value of ESG and also the kind of harmful impact of construction work.
And I'm being hugely optimistic sat here on the responsibility. That is kind of what we do in many ways on the show. But yeah, acknowledging there's a lot of work to do, but ultimately you can imagine us looking back at some point in the future and going, that was the kind of slightly messy, slightly clumsy period where everyone was just getting their house in order, understanding how to create clean data streams, understanding how to interpret data, etc. And then almost that gave birth in many ways to this new era of true innovation within the sustainability space. And that's certainly what I hope for in our lifetime, put it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to hope for. I agree.
Well, Carrie, let's conclude now. And I know that was, again, a whistle-stop tour through some of the themes in the articles today. But on the basis of getting a little bit overly optimistic from my end, I'm now going to hand you the very optimistic magic wand that you can then use as you see fit. Carrie, if I was to hand you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
I'm going to cheat. I've got two things, sorry. But the first one is, I'm sure you've heard it before, but we really need to shift away from focusing on financial value alone without attributing the same weight to other types of value, particularly the social value and the value of environment and nature. And until that gets built into the bottom line in spreadsheets, I feel like we're going to be stuck in the same sort of situation whereby commercial, financial sort of needs and goals always take precedence over people and planet. My second one is, I guess it's related to that, but building on that, I would love to see nature given a voice at the table among more businesses. I know that's something that's starting to happen in some of the most innovative organizations. It's something that we've started to have conversations around at UST. But I think that would be just to continue that shift away from shareholders as being the main levers of influence in an organization towards a wider group of stakeholders, which should include the planet and the nature and perhaps also future generations, I'd throw in, if we're being really ambitious.
Carrie, I love the ambition. I also think it's incredibly naughty to have used the magic wand twice, but you get away with it because they were particularly good magic wand suggestions. You're right. The first one is something that, it does come up a lot, and there is that argument and balance between the pragmatism of the sort of the world that we live in and the drivers at play, and understanding perhaps if there's a different way of doing things moving forward. And I think that's a brilliant observation. The second point I think is fascinating. I want to ask you, what does that look like in practice? People talk about nature joining the board and all those sorts of things. What does that, for anybody that's not really clear on what that actually means, you don't just invite somebody dressed up as a tree to come along to the board meeting, do you? What does it mean?
I would love to see someone dressed up as a tree. Perhaps you'd like to join us dressed up as a tree one day at a board meeting.
More than welcome. More than happy to.
Brilliant idea. I think how that works in reality is that I haven't seen it, but I would think that you would have nature as an agenda item on every agenda, so that someone stops to reflect on what would nature's position on this topic be. And I think if you're doing it really sort of strongly and robustly, nature should have a vote on any kind of board matters that require a vote. So, equal vote to any other human member present.
So, and again, sorry for getting overly technical here, but just so and I appreciate you, perhaps this is something you guys are looking at, but that you'd have somebody who was voting on behalf of nature.
I think so. I think maybe as a team we would say, okay, and how would nature respond to this issue, and agree together. Nature would vote X. Okay, so let's throw an extra vote into the pot with nature's vote on it.
I'm with you. Okay, sort of a democratically, yeah. Okay, interesting, fascinating. I think it seems. I mean, I'm going to now promote myself on the show as being available for any tree-based costume appearances that anybody wants me to make. But that adoption of nature on the board is a brilliant suggestion too. Carrie, I know it's been an absolute, as I say, what's to stop tour, but thank you so much for persevering and coming back on the show today. It's been great to have you on.
Not at all. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
And that's all for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big, big thank you to Carrie Bihar, Head of Sustainability at the Useful Simple Trust, for joining me on today's show. This episode was brought to you by TrueMark, the independent mark of integrity for sustainability reporting. Visit truemark.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.